We have had a multi-agency approach to this. That's how important it is to this president to make sure that East Palestine residents get what they need to deal with the situation that's currently happening.
Thank you.
So look, as you've heard from the president many times, we certainly want to see an end to this war. That is something that we would like to see, and it could happen if Mr. Putin decided to leave Ukraine and stop the war that he started, stop the brutal war that he has started against the Ukrainian people. But right now, we don't see any reason or any evidence that Russia is willing to negotiate here. And when it comes to that, any negotiation, we've said this numerous of times, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So what we're going to continue to do is make sure that the Ukrainians have what they need to be able to continue their success on the battlefield. And if there is a time where President Zelensky is ready to have that conversation, he will have strength at the negotiation table.
Skeptical about this so-called China peace initiative.
Look, I'm not going to speak to that. That is for China to speak to. What we're saying is we would love to see an end to this war. Of course, this almost one-year war that Russia has caused. An aggression, a brutal aggression that Russia has put on the Ukrainian people. Let's not forget, this is their sovereignty. This is about their democracy, their freedom. Okay.
Thanks, Karine. On the Russia sanctions, can you say how many entities are going to be sanctioned, names of banks, companies that will fall under U.S. sanctions?
Not going to get ahead of the president tomorrow.
On the search for Fed Vice Chair, can you talk about the decision-making process there with regard to how the president is considering diversity? There's been some pressure from senators to name a Latino candidate, for example. How important is it to the president to name a woman or a person of color to that job?
So I'll just first say that clearly filling that vacancy is something that's important to the president, and will certainly nominate someone in the near future. When it comes to diversity, you've heard this from the president, you've heard this from me, you've heard this from many of us here. Diversity and representation is really important to this president, and you know, we are going to look at, the president's going to look at a highly diverse group of world-class economists, and just as we did for the previous Fed nominations. So we're going to continue that process. But I want to take the opportunity to lay out how diverse the president's cabinet has been, how diverse the president's administration has been. The cabinet is majority people of color for the first time in history. The cabinet is majority female for the first time in history. A majority of White House senior staff identify as female. 40% of White House senior staff identify as part of the racially diverse communities, and a record 7 assistants to the president are openly LGBTQ+. So again, this is something that the president prides himself on, that he actually has taken action to show the diversity of this administration. And so he will continue not just with this Fed Vice Chair occupancy, but with any occupancy or any position that's within the White House.
Last one really quickly. There was a report that the U.S. is sending 100 to 200 military troops to Taiwan. Can you talk about the decision, why the U.S. felt that's necessary?
So that any specific numbers or that decision, I would refer you to the Department of Defense. But of course, I will, lay out what our policy is when it comes to Taiwan. Our support for and defense relationship with Taiwan remains aligned against the current threat posed by the People's Republic of China and consistent with our One China policy. That has not changed. Our commitment to Taiwan contributes to the maintenance of peace and stability across Taiwan Strait and within the region. But again, for that specific question on numbers and what's occurring there, I would refer you to the Department of Defense. Okay.
Thanks, Karine. I wanted to ask about the White House thoughts on congressional Republicans stepping up oversight efforts of U.S. aid to Ukraine. House oversight yesterday called for extra documentation of the aid, House Appropriations and House Armed Services. They plan oversight hearings next week. I mean, what does the White House think of all this Republican scrutiny?
So look, I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say this again. When it comes to these oversight hearings, we've been very clear. The president has been very clear. He's going to focus on what the American people want us to focus on, which is continuing to work to lower inflation, continuing to make sure that we have an economy that works for all, and continue to make sure that we're fighting for just individual freedoms. And that is something that we saw after the midterms. That was very clear what the voters wanted to see. They wanted to see us move forward in a bipartisan way to deliver on those things that I just listed out. Look, when it comes to Ukraine aid, I think what is probably the thing that I would say here is that we have seen bipartisan support when it comes to Ukraine aid. When you look at the support from in Congress, and like the president said, some House Republicans were in Ukraine themselves, meeting with President Zelensky just this week to vow their support for what is for their fight, for the Ukrainians' fight for freedom and for their democracy. And so again, we're providing military, security, and economic support to the Ukrainians to fight for their freedom. We think it's an important thing to do as the United States, to make sure that democracy is being fought for, and we are standing up for that. And so I'll just leave it there.
But I mean, is there no concern about the extra calls for oversight? I mean, it seems to be a response to their constituents, at least, of a softening of support for U.S. aid. There have been recent polls. Absolutely, you're right that bipartisan support is still there, but there has been, after a year, there has been a softening of support. Polls show that. Is that a concern of the president, that some Americans, at least, their support for U.S. aid, or that much U.S. aid going to Ukraine, is not what it used to be?
Look, I think that, and we have seen that, Americans know what is at stake here. They understand that freedom is at stake. They understand that democracy is at stake. And they understand the role that we play as a country globally. And that is something that we truly believe. And so the president believes we have a role to play, and we've seen it. We've seen it with the alliance, the strong alliance of NATO. Remember, NATO was supposed to be torn apart and fall, just like Kyiv was supposed to fall, and it became stronger. We've seen the West come together. We've seen Europe come together, and we saw the president really speak to that on the world stage this week. Not just to Ukrainians, not just to Russia, but to the world stage about what this means for all of us. So we think Americans understand that. We think that the Americans see that, and we're going to continue to do the work that is needed to protect democracy.
Thanks, Karine. These sanctions tomorrow, are they going to be announced by the whole of the G7 together, or is it going to be U.S. sanctions? And then just sort of how it's going to come out. Will it be coming out as part of that G7 meeting, or a separate announcement?
I don't want to get ahead. It's certainly something that the president will speak to when it comes to the sanctions, as I just laid out at the top. I'm not going to get ahead of what the president's going to announce tomorrow. There'll be a G7 meeting. As part of that, the president's going to be making an announcement on sanctions. I'm not going to get ahead of what the president's going to say, or how it's in what vehicle it's going to come out. Yeah, Peter.
Can I just ask you again, following up on East Palestine, can you at least, I know you can't say that the president has plans to go there now, but is it in discussion that the president may go there in the near future?
I just don't have anything to share. I know there's a lot of interest on that.
I mean, I guess the question, for folks there, though, at least to say it's in discussion, has it been something that's even under consideration? I
mean, I think what folks should understand, and what folks should, I think, feel at ease, is that the president has taken this very seriously. Hours after the derailment occurred, you saw, again, the EPA on the ground, and you're seeing a multi-agency reaction to this, because the president had promised not just the people of East Palestine, but also to their governors, to their leadership, that we would be on the ground for as long as it takes to make sure that the community has what it needs. And you have seen that. You've seen the administrator on the ground with the governor on the ground. You've seen them talking to the community. Again, Secretary Pete was just there, again, meeting with the mayor, the mayor there, and continuing to do.
Was Secretary Pete there at the president's direction?
Look, the Secretary Pete went because he believed that it was important for him to go there at this time, and it is. It is.
Was this the right time to go? He said he wanted to go at the right time. Was this the right time? Even he today had some reservations about whether he met the right balance.
Look, I think it was important. I think what's important is that he was there. I think what's important is that we saw Secretary of the Department of Transportation there. I do want to say one thing though, which is there's been a lot of bad faith attacks on Secretary Buttigieg. And the reason why we believe it's bad faith is, if you remember Elaine Chao, she was, she was the head of Department of Transportation, and when there was these types of chemical spills, nobody was calling for her to be fired, and nobody was calling for what they're calling on Secretary Pete. It is pure politics. It's pure political stunts, what they're doing. You have seen an administration that has, because of the leadership of this president, that's taken action, and multi-agency action to deal with the needs that we're seeing on the ground with the community of East Palestine.
I just want to follow up on two other topics that were asked earlier. You were asked about when we could expect to see the declassified intelligence as it relates to the accusation that China is considering providing lethal aid to Russia. A year ago, almost exactly a year ago, before the invasion by Russia, the administration was very quick to turn over declassified intelligence to demonstrate that Russia was planning this. What's different now that the administration is reluctant or reticent to turn over the intelligence that says China is actively considering providing lethal aid to Russia?
So I just want to clear something up. So on Ohio for a second. So Elaine Chao, who was the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, when she had to deal with DOT, pardon me, no one called her out, right? When you think about the chemical spills, it is something that the Environmental Protection Agency has to deal with, right? They are the ones who have to take leadership, and that's what you've seen. That's what you've seen from February 4th until now, which is Environmental Protection Agency taking charge. So Secretary Buttigieg being there now, he's not, the Department of Transportation is not leading this effort. It's the Environmental Protection Agency. Just wanted to be very, very clear on that, and that is why the attacks that we are seeing on Secretary Buttigieg is really just in bad faith. And can you say your question again?
Yeah, I'll ask you again. So a year ago, before Russia invaded Ukraine, the administration was very quick to present declassified intelligence that said Russia's about to do this.
Yeah.
Turns out they were right. It was accurate. This time around, the accusation has been made by the administration that China is actively considering providing lethal aid to Russia. But this time around, the administration is much more reluctant or reticent to provide that information. What's different now? Why not turn that over right away since the accusation has been made?
So, I mean, we've been very clear that we haven't seen them do it yet, but they haven't taken it off the table. I'm not.
The intelligence
No,
that backs it up, though.
I totally understand. I'm certainly not going to get ahead of the intelligence community. That is something that is clearly at this time classified, so certainly not going to get ahead.
The president can declassify. Does he think it's the right decision?
I understand, but it's also in conversation, right, with the intelligence community as well when we speak to these when we speak to these classified matters. So just want to be very careful here, and also very mindful. I think you're comparing two things that are very different, we believe, when you think about what happened a year ago, when we were talking about Russia potentially invading Ukraine. We believed at the time it was important to share that evidence. We believed that it was important for the American people to see what was about to occur. And so, two different things. We have not seen them.
Is it not important to share that evidence this
time?
No,
but I'm just saying we haven't seen it yet. I mean, I'm actually answering your question. We haven't seen it yet. And so, but what we know is it has not been taken off the table, right? So we haven't seen it yet. We're actually sharing that information, but it's not been taken off the table. Okay.
Quick follow-up on Peter's question on Ohio. The president has said many times, in his own words, that he likes to provide comfort to Americans who are grieving, Americans who are in crisis. Has he expressed interest in or the intention to provide that kind of support to East Palestinians? Does he want to provide that support to them?
Of course. He's the president of the United States. He's the president for red and blue states. He, of course, wants to provide that support. That's what he's been doing. That's why you've seen the Environmental Protection Agency administrator on the ground. That's why you're seeing Secretary Buttigieg on the ground, providing that support. And not just those two agencies, other agencies as well, making sure that the East Palestine community are getting what they need at this difficult time. And so this is a president that understands what people are going through when they're going through hardships. He understands that personally, and that's why he's getting updates regularly, and that's why he has made sure that we've had this type of reaction since practically almost day one, hours within the derailment. And so we'll continue to do that. He has said multiple times, I have said multiple times that the president is going to continue to be there for the people, the community of East Palestine, for as long as if it's needed, for as long as it takes.
But does he not want to do it directly in
I
person?
I think offering the assistance, offering the help is doing it directly. When you're seeing the federal government on the ground providing the assistance that is needed, that is doing it directly. That's doing it. They're doing it on the direction of the president. That multi-agency, what we have been able to do over the past couple of weeks, that is because of the direction of the president. And we have seen that not just for these types of situations, but others as well. Of course, our hearts go out for the people of Palestine and their community, the community, and what they're going through right now. This is why the president continues to be updated every single day, and has called again for not just the agencies, but for the teams here at the White House to make sure that we are working closely with local government and state government to make sure that we are delivering for the community. And not just in Ohio. Remember, there is Pennsylvania as well, who we've been in touch with the governor there as well.
Quick question on Ukraine and China. You now have the major regions of the world involved directly in the war in Ukraine: Europe, North America, the Middle East, Asia. What are the president's plans to bring us back from the brink of a World War II kind of scenario here?
I mean, look, I think what you've seen the president do this past week speaks to the unwavering support that you have seen for Ukraine, not just from the United States, the NATO allies, the West, and how Europe has been unified. And we have to remember, we have to go back in time just a little bit to see where we were just almost a year ago, where the expectation was that NATO would crumble. The expectation was that Kyiv would fall. That was what was expected and being reported, that Russia was going to take over Ukraine. And it has not happened. And that is because of the strength that we have seen of the alliance and the partnership that we have seen. And that's what the president was there for this week, to continue to show that. And as we move forward, as we move towards the next several months. And so that's what is important. NATO is strong. Unwavering support is strong. Our support for Ukraine is strong. And we're sending a message not just to the Ukrainians and their bravery and what they've been able to do for this past year, but also to Russia and to the world. And so to answer your question, I think the president sent a very loud message to everyone just across the world about how important it is to continue to make sure that we're fighting for democracy and we're fighting for freedom. And it means something to do so. I have to move around because we don't have that much time.
Thank you, Karine. The president acted quickly in naming a new head of the World Bank. There are two other big vacancies right now. The Fed chair, vice chair of the Fed, and also labor secretary. I'm wondering if you can give us any sense of the timeline, and particularly on the vice chair for the Fed, whether you want somebody in place, or the president wants somebody in place by the time the open market committee meeting.
So I don't have a timeline for you. I can tell you that it is a priority for the president, and we'll see. I talked about the vice chair. It is something that we're going to certainly address in the near future. Just don't have a timeline. I'm going to let the president move forward with his process. And the same with the Department of Labor secretary. Clearly, that is another important position that the president wants to fill as soon as possible. Just don't have a timeline at this time.
Will the open market committee meeting be some sort of absolute, because that's like the end of March, I believe.
What I will say is that it is a priority for this president. He thinks it's important to get those two positions filled, and so we will do that.
And then next week, the student loan case is going to be before the Supreme Court. I'm wondering how confident is the administration feeling about its position on that case, and whether there's any sort of backup plan should the Supreme Court not.
We feel very confident in our legal process here.
What about the idea of any sort of backup plan?
Right now, we just feel very confident. Look, we have to remember what the student loan plan means and why the president put that forward. It's to help tens of millions of Americans, give them a little breathing room, give them an opportunity as we're coming out of this pandemic, this once-in-a-generation pandemic, and folks are remember, one of the reasons we put this forward was because we were going to lift the payment, the loan payment, the student loan payment, to give them a little extra breathing room to make sure that they're able to get back on their feet as they were having to. Some of them had to pay back their student loans, and so this is we see this as an important policy that is going to help millions, again, tens of millions of Americans across the country who need it, who need that opportunity to start a family, who need that opportunity to buy a home. And so it is unfortunate to us that Republicans are out there, Republicans officials across the country are out there trying to stop something, trying to stop a policy that would really help everyday Americans who need just a little bit of assistance.
Just one really quick last one. Over the weekend, UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield said there would be a quote unquote red line for China if lethal weapons or lethal material were provided to Russia. Is that a phrase that the White House would repeat? Is that a phrase that the White House supports using in this?
So I'll say that so far it hasn't happened, as I was telling to Peter. I'm not going to talk about what we anticipate or any new indications, but we have been clear with China from the beginning on the consequences and implications of providing this kind of support to Russia. We have been very, very clear about that. I'm just not going to add to any more to that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Karine. Two questions, one on Ukraine, one from a colleague who covers immigration. On Ukraine, when the president was in Poland, people were pleading with him to provide F-16s to Ukraine. He probably saw and heard some of those protesters. He has said that he is not going to provide F-16s to Ukraine, that is not something the U.S. will do. Is he still standing by that? So
look, I talked about this a little bit when I was asked moments ago about any extra aid that we're providing to Ukraine. Look, we've been in lockstep with the Ukrainians and with our partners to provide Ukraine with the capabilities that it needs, and we are in regular communication with the Ukrainians on their needs on the battlefield, and also making sure they have the humanitarian assistance and other assistance that we've been providing for this past year that they need. I'm just not going to get ahead of that. But look, we are committed again to supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes, and I'll just leave it there.
So that isn't a firm no, never going to happen from the president?
Again, we are constantly in conversation with Ukraine, providing them with the need that the assistance that they need to be successful on the battlefield. I'm just don't have anything else to say beyond what the president has commented on.
Thank you. And then really quickly on immigration, the administration proposed a rule this week that would make migrants ineligible for asylum if they cross the southern border without first asking for refuge in a third country, at least generally speaking. It's kind of similar to a Trump-era rule. Administration officials told reporters on a call this week it wasn't their first or second preference to do it this way. Is this rule a recognition that the administration's early border strategy just isn't working? And is it realistic that President Biden's campaign promises to end all Trump-era immigration restrictions was that unrealistic?
So you mentioned there is a huge difference here, which is what we are providing is expanded legal pathways. And that is important to make note, is that is something that the past administration didn't do, and that is something that we are doing here. Look, on day one, the president put forward a comprehensive immigration reform proposal, and that's showing that the president was taking this very seriously. And the way that we see this is Congress needs to act. And what was happening currently right now is Congress is not acting. So what you're seeing from the Department of Homeland Security is they are using the tools that is being presented to them so that we can deal with this situation and do it in a safe and orderly and humane way. And that's what we're doing here. And let's not forget, if you look at the parolee program that we put forth, remember the president announced on January 5th some of the proposals that on how he was going to move forward. He talked about expanding the parolee program. You have 4 countries, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti. And if you look at that program, it's been very successful. It has brought down legal migration by 97%. And so we see that is working. But look, this president is going to use the tools that he has. The Department of Homeland Security, as you're seeing, is using the tools that they have in front of them to deal with this real issue. And let's not forget, when it comes to Title 42, it's going to lift on May 11th. So we believe that we had to take steps to deal with this. We can't leave it on the NGOs. We can't just leave it on the communities. We also have to take steps to deal with this issue. Okay, go ahead.
Just 2 questions. First of all, the president frequently visits the sites of many natural and man-made disasters, and this situation in East Palestine has clearly required a multi-agency response from the federal and the state level. So I guess I'm just struggling to understand why the president wouldn't go to East Palestine. Does it simply not meet the bar for a presidential visit?
Look, I want to be very clear here. There's no reason to struggle, I don't think, on this question. I think when you look at how the federal agencies have responded from day one and took this very seriously and reacted within hours of the derailment and was on the ground. This is the Environmental Protection Agency, as I was saying. They are the ones that deal with these types of chemical spills. They are the ones that are the leaders on this. It didn't stop with the environmental. You're right there, buddy?
It's my family, but everyone's okay.
Okay, what was that?
It's a little family tune.
Oh, it's pretty good tune there. Oh, all right. Peter Alexander getting down with his phone. Okay, so, and it didn't stop. What I want to say is that it didn't stop with the Environmental Protection Agency. Again, FEMA, CDC.
That's all different from a presidential visit.
No, look, I want to be very clear here. I don't have anything to share on a presidential visit, not at this time, or anything to announce, but it does matter that the president put forth a multi-agency kind of reaction to this, taking it seriously.
Showing up, right?
Look, showing up is having the Environmental Protection Administrator on the ground. Showing up is having the DOT Secretary on the ground to talk about what is the next process, holding to account the company that caused the spill. That's what you're seeing from Secretary Buttigieg today. Showing action is also seeing that HHS, CDC, FEMA, all of these guys are on the ground at the direction of this president. So that is taking this very seriously. When the president was in Poland, he took calls and called and reached out and got updates from his leadership in those agencies, and he continued to make sure that he was talking to to the governors of Pennsylvania and Ohio, Governor DeWine and Shapiro. That matters. That's what leadership looks like, and leadership matters as well. And that's what you're seeing instead of political stunts that we're seeing from the other side. Look, people have been talking about regulation and deregulation. One of the things, we've been hearing from the other side, we've been hearing from the GOP about how now they're interested, all of a sudden they are interested in the safety of East Palestine, when they have for years have been in lockstep with the retail lobby, in lockstep, making sure that they think that the safety, they were stopping or repealing the common sense safety laws that would, help in this situation. I understand that we're waiting to see the investigation. Maybe it would have helped or not helped, but it doesn't matter. What matters is there is real, true ways to create safety as it relates to rail, and they've been against that for years against that in the lockstep with rail lobbyists. And so there is a false comparison here, and we're just going to have to call that out.
And then just on the new asylum rules, I know that you just laid out the differences that you see in the Trump administration rules and the new ones that you guys have announced. But a lot of migrant advocate groups don't see it that way. They see this as mirroring the Trump-era rules. So what do you say to these migrant advocate groups and these communities who now feel very much betrayed by this president?
Look, here's the thing. We don't see anybody else providing any other solutions when it comes to Congress. We don't. we've provided solution after solution. The president, again on day one, provided a comprehensive immigration reform proposal. Put it out there on the first day. Republicans have rejected it. And so we are trying to put forward a way to move forward with an immigration policy that secures our border, that is safe, and that is humane. And what are they providing? Nothing. And so one of the things that we can say, and we see this in the data, that we have increased pathways to legal pathways. We expanded that, and we see that it's working. Again, no one else is providing any other options. So what we're doing, the Department of Homeland Security, the president is using the tools that we have in order to deal with this issue. I'm going to take one in the back. Go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, thanks, Karine. So one quick clarification I wanted to ask you about. So on the sanctions, do those third-party countries attempting to evade our sanctions that you talked about at the top, does that include Chinese companies?
I'm just not going to get ahead of any announcement that's going to happen tomorrow.
The president has been traveling the world pledging to help other countries solve their energy issues. The latest one was with Poland pledging to build power plants or help them build power plants. How come there's no pivot in energy policy here at home to help the inflation that we're seeing here?
Have you read the Inflation Reduction Act?
Still waiting.
I mean, the Inflation Reduction, the Inflation Reduction Act does just that. Inflation Reduction Act actually helps lower cost energy costs and gives Americans a little breathing room, which is part of the president's economic policy. If you think about what he has said for the past 2 years, which is making sure that we have an economy that works for everyone, build it from the bottom up, middle out. And the Inflation Reduction Act is so important because it deals with energy policy, lowering the cost, because it deals with health care, things that is incredibly important to Americans across the country, especially our seniors, making sure that we're capping at $2,000 for medical drug costs. That is important. So yes, the president has been talking about this and dealing with it in a real way. And we're seeing that his economic policy is working. The Inflation Reduction Act, not only that it does lower costs when it comes to healthcare and energy, but it's also going to lower the deficit by $200 billion, something else that the president cares about when it comes to making sure that we are not adding to our deficit. And that shows how fiscally responsible this president is. I got to keep going. Go ahead, April.
She said April. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Michael.
2 questions, Karine, real fast. Going back to Palestine. You say that the federal government is going to hold Norfolk Southern accountable. But what is the long-term commitment from the federal government as it relates to the residents there when it comes to the water, when it comes to the soil, and when it comes to the air?
We're going to be there to assist the East Palestine community for as long as it takes. That's what the president said. We're going to be there to assist for as long as it takes, and that's what you will see from this president. And it's not the first time. Anytime there is some sort of devastating event, you have heard the president say that over and over, and he has actually kept to his word over the last 2 years. And so that's what you're going to see.
When you look at what the chemical was, the toxin can be evidence itself years later. Will the federal government be there that long as it takes, as you say, just watching?
Well, as you know, there's an investigation going on at this moment, so we're going to let that investigation continue. But, you know, we're going to assist for as long as it takes. We're going to make sure that the company cleans up, pays for the cleanup, pays for the work that the EPA is doing currently right now. That's what you heard from Administrator Regan, and we're going to, you know, we're going to be consistent and stick to that. And you heard from the NTSB today with their initial finding to tell us what happened, but we still don't know the why.
And last question. There seems to be more activity from a lot of groups who are very upset with what Ron DeSantis is doing when it comes to cutting off the AP courses on African American history. With that said, I'm sure this White House has talked about it, but is the president talking to the Education Secretary Cardona about what steps can be done to rally other states to make sure that education is that teaching facts?
So as you know, when it comes to education and making sure our children are getting what they need in the classroom, the education that they so deserve. That is something that's important to the president. He always talks about how the First Lady is an educator, and clearly it's something personal to him and to the First Lady. I do not have any specific conversation to read out about what's currently happening happening in Florida, and I know you've heard me talk about it. You've heard others from the administration speak to what we're seeing currently on the ground, but I don't have any specific conversation that is specific to policies or anything that's being done. But clearly, making sure that our children get the education that they so deserve is certainly important to this president. I'm going to take another. Okay. I know. Okay. I'm going to take one. Go ahead, Alex, in the back. Oh,
hey,
no,
right.
Alex. I'm sorry. I was calling Alex.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Karine, we're seeing violence escalate in the Middle East, and I think we all know the president's stated position on Israeli security and Palestinian statehood. But what can this administration do right now to keep that from spiraling out of control?
So let me just speak to the most recent violence that we have seen in Israel. I know my colleagues at the State Department spoke to this yesterday, and I just want to reiterate because I think it's important for us to reiterate from here at the podium. We're tracking the Israeli raid in Nablus very closely, and mourn the loss of civilian lives. We hope for the speedy recovery of those injured. While we recognize the very real security concerns facing Israel and the West Bank and Gaza, we are extremely concerned by the ongoing violence. We urge Israel and Palestinian Authority to protect against further loss of civilian life. Yesterday's events further underscore the urgent need for both sides to take steps that de-escalate tensions, prevent further loss of civilian life, and work together to improve the security situation in the West Bank. And that's what we think we need to be doing together. One thing I do want to just read out a little bit here. The National Security Council Coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa, Brett McGurk, is currently in the Middle East North Africa region with an interagency delegation for a series of diplomatic engagements. His trip will include stops in Egypt, Jordan, Oman, UAE, and we don't have anything further to preview on this engagement at this time. But this is something clearly that we take very seriously. You know, Secretary Blinken was in the region recently, and so again, we're going to continue to call out the concerns that we're seeing, and I'll just leave it there for now. All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Catholic bishop murdered in California. Karine, does the president have a response on the Catholic bishop murdered in California?